Let's do a brief overview of how the chords and voicings volume is laid out and the components which comprise it. Like the scales and modes volume was divided up by scales, the chords and voicings volume is divided by chords. Each chord, from simple triads to complex polychords, has an interval map page. This graphs out every note possible for every chord in all 12 keys, depicting the numeric formula. Following the interval map for each 3 and 4 note chord are the example pages. The example pages are divided into 12 keys, 3 per page. And to the far left of each example is a chord voicing. Following the chord voicing to the right are compatible scale and mode patterns in relatively the same position. Following the 9th, 11th, and 13th chord interval map page is a graphic breakdown listing all polychord formulas, slash chord equivalents, and substitutions for each chord. In the back of the book is a section called the chord derivative charts, and we will discuss these in detail in Lesson 1. Following the chord derivative charts are the numeric analysis of chords. From simple triads to complex polychords, all the chord formulas are graphed out for you in building block format. On the very last page of the book is a polychord formula chart which lists different polychord formulas to help you voice the various 9ths, 11ths, 13ths, or altered chords. We will discuss this in detail in Lesson 8. On to the lessons. Let's start with the C major scale. A basic chord formula for building chords is to use every other tone of the scale, in this case the major scale. Play the 1, skip the 2, play the 3, skip the 4, play the 5, skip the 6, and play the 7. You now have a major 7th chord. 1, 3, 5, 7. This works for all the modes. But just like the modes, the intervallic relationship changes. Let's shift and go to the Dorian mode and extract a chord from that. We now get 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. From the Phrygian mode, we get 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. From the Lydian, we get 1, 3, 5, 7. From the Mixolydian, we get 1, 3, 5, flat 7. From the Aeolian, we get 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. From the Locrian, we get 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. The modal chords that you have just learned are given numbers in Roman numerals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 1 chord is always a major 7th. The 2 chord is always a minor 7th. The 3 chord is always a minor 7th. The 4 chord is always a major 7th. The 5 chord is always a dominant 7th. The 6th chord is always a minor 7th, and the 7th chord is always a half diminished. This remains constant regardless of what key we are playing in unless we alter them, but that will be discussed in the Progressions and Improvisation DVD. What about complex chords like 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths? Let's start with our major 7th. As you're stretching into the 2nd octave, here's the octave, which would be the 8. There's our 9th, which is actually a 2. There's a 10. There's our 11, which is actually a 4. 12, and 13, which is actually a 6. You're still playing every other tone, except that the 2, 4, 6 have been extended into the second octave, which makes them a 9th, 11th, and 13th. That's it. It's as simple as this. In the back of your Chords and Voicings volume, starting on page 190, is a section called Chord Derivative Charts. Each chord is on a page by itself, with all the scales and modes that are compatible with it. The tones of the chord are highlighted in grayscale, so you can quickly and easily see the chord-scale relationship. You can also see in these charts how the altered tones can produce compatibility, even though the theory may get a little strange. For example, the Lydian sharp 2 6th mode of the harmonic minor is compatible with the minor chord because sharp 2 is the same as a flat 3. Once again, we see that in the Lydian sharp 6 sharp 2, which is the 6th mode of the Hungarian minor. Sharp 2 is the same as a flat 3. We see that down here in the enigmatic mode 2. Sharp 2 is the same as a flat 3, and a double sharp 4 is the same as a 5, which gives us the equivalent of 1, flat 3, 5, in other words, the minor chord. So, studying this section, you will quickly and easily see the scale chord compatibility, and it will become very clear to you. On page 218 and 219 of your Guitar Grimoire Chords and Voicings volume, there is a chart showing you the chord names and the chord formula in building block format, starting with simple triads all the way to complex polychords. Now, you've learned the secret of scale chord compatibility. As long as the scale contains the tones of the chord you are using, they will be compatible, and vice versa. Let's touch upon basic chord naming. The combination of these symbols, in addition to the flat and sharp symbols, will give you the tools you need to name any kind of chord. There are 7 important symbols which constitute a sort of musical shorthand. The first symbol is the minus symbol. Whenever you see the minus symbol next to any letter, it means minor. Some writings will use the little m as the minor symbol, but we will use the minus as the minor, such as C minor, D minor, E minor, etc. Never use the minus symbol as a flat. I've seen a flat 9 written as -9, and that is wrong. This is an erroneous use of this symbol. The next symbol is the plus sign or symbol. Whenever you see this symbol, it means the 5 is sharp. Never use this symbol as a sharp, such as +9. This is an erroneous use of the symbol. For anything other than designation of the 5, write out your flats and sharps. The next symbol is a little circle, the degree symbol. Musically, it represents the diminished symbol. It means that the 3 and the 5 are both flat. The next symbol is the triangle. If you see this next to a letter such as C, it is the symbol for a major 7th, which is 1, 3, 5, 7. When you see the triangle, you will think major 7th. It is not to be used in any other way. It is only to be used for the major 7th. It is a quick shorthand, instead of writing MAJ7. The next symbol is the 7. That tells you that the 7 is flat. It is known as the dominant, as in C7, D7, etc. When you see it, it tells you that you are using the tones 1, 3, 5, flat 7. The next symbol is the circle with the slash through it. It is known as the half diminished symbol. It automatically tells you the formula you are using is flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. So when you see the symbol C half diminished, D half diminished, E half diminished, it is telling you that you are playing 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. Many times you will also see this chord written out as C minor 7, flat 5. While this is not incorrect, the formula flat 3, flat 5, flat 7 has its own symbol, the half diminished symbol. The next symbol is the diminished seventh, the degree circle with the 7, also known as a fully diminished seventh. This tells you automatically that you are playing 1, flat 3, flat 5, and double flat 7. Now we will learn how to combine the symbols to name the most complex of chords. Let's start with this symbol here, and it's going to be a C major 7th. We will add the minus right in front of the triangle. Some musicians may write this out as a C minor major chord, or a C major minor chord, but it is more expedient to write it out this way: C minor delta. Delta can be used interchangeably with major 7th. The minus tells you that the third is flat. What if we take that and add a plus to it? This automatically tells us that we are playing a 1, flat 3, sharp 5, and a 7. Now let's get to chords such as 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths. If you see a letter followed by a 9, such as C9, D9, E9, etc., the 9th, 11th, or 13th by themselves automatically tell you that there is a flat 7. In other words, for the C9, you would play 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9. For a C11th, you would be playing 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11. And for the 13th, a C13th, you would be playing a 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, 13. If you don't want the dominant in there and want the major 7th in there, you use this symbol, the triangle, and you have a major 9th, a major 11th, and a major 13th. If you have a chord such as a C7 sharp 9, it will be written out as C7 sharp 9. As I stated before, never use the plus as a sharp symbol. Now, if you have a C7 plus sharp 9, that is telling you you have a dominant augmented with a sharp 9th. The formula is 1, 3, sharp 5, flat 7, sharp 9. Now, let's look at what you have when you see a C minor delta augmented sharp 11, flat 13. First of all, the starting pitch of your 1 is the C. The minus symbol tells you that the third is flat. The triangle tells you that you're using a major 7th, and the 7th is not flat. The plus tells us that the 5 is sharp, and the sharp in front of the 11 is obvious. The 11 is sharp. And the flat in front of the 13 is obvious. The 13th is flat. Here's the formula: 1, flat 3, sharp 5, 7, 9, sharp 11, flat 13. Let's discuss another strange chord. It's called the alt chord. The reason it's called the alt chord is that there are 4 interchangeable chords that you can use, and they are all alts. I didn't name it, I'm just teaching you it. The 4 chords are flat 5, sharp 9, flat 5, flat 9, sharp 5, flat 9, sharp 5, sharp 9. Whenever you see alt in a fake book or a songbook, you can use any of these four voicings. And the formula is 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7, sharp 9. The next 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7, flat 9. The next 1, 3, sharp 5, flat 7, flat 9. And the last 1, 3, sharp 5, flat 7, sharp 9. All four are interchangeable. There is one more strange chord name I want to discuss with you. It's called the Q3. Of course, you could have a Q4 or Q5, but let's start with the Q3. The Q stands for quartal, which basically means fourths. A quartal voicing is a voicing using fourths. A Q3 is a double fourth. In other words, 1, 4, flat 7. The distance from the 4 to the flat 7 is a fourth, hence the name Q3. A Q4 would be 1, 4, flat 7, sharp 9. And a Q5 would be the same thing, but with a flat 13th added. 1, 4, flat 7, sharp 9, flat 13. In other words, a stack of fourths. Now that you learned how to name the chords, let's go through all the 3 and 4 note chords. The first is the major. 1, 3, 5. Flat the 3, you get a minor. 1, flat 3, 5. Here's the sus2. 1, 2, 5. Here's the sus4. 1, 4, 5. Many times on the sus4, the 4 is omitted and it is written just as sus, and it is understood that it's a sus4. In the case of both sus chords are usually resolved to a major chord like this. Sus2 to a major, sus4 to a major. Okay, let's move on. Here's the flat 5 chord. 1, 3, flat 5. Flat the 3 as well, you have a diminished. 1, flat 3, flat 5. The next chord can commonly be called the 5/8 chord because it is the 5th with an octave. The next chord is the augmented chord. 1, 3, sharp 5, and the last of the 3 note chords is the Q3, which is 1, 4, flat 7. Now let's move on to the 4 note chords. The first of the 4 note chords are the sixths. This is a flat 6 chord. 1, 3, 5, flat 6. This is a minor flat 6. 1, flat 3, 5, flat 6. This is a 6th. 1, 3, 5, 6. This is a minor 6. 1, flat 3, 5, 6. The next is the diminished 7th. 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. The diminished 7th is sometimes considered part of the 6th family because the double flat 7 is the same as a 6th. The next of the 4 note chords are the dominant chords. Dominant is interchangeable with 7th. The first is the 7th itself. 1, 3, 5, flat 7. The next is the minor 7th. 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. Next is the dominant sus2. 1, 2, 5, flat 7. Next is the dominant sus. 1, 4, 5, flat 7. Again, just as with the other sus chord, sometimes you'll see it written as just dominant sus or dominant sus4. Next comes the dominant flat 5. 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7. The next is the half diminished. 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. The last of the dominant chords is the dominant augmented. 1, 3, sharp 5, flat 7. The last group of 4 note chords are the major 7th chords. The major seventh can be interchangeably referred to as delta. The first is the major seventh chord itself. 1, 3, 5, 7. The next is the minor delta. 1, flat 3, 5, 7. Next is delta sus2. 1, 2, 5, 7. Next is the delta sus. 1, 4, 5, 7. Next is the delta flat 5. 1, 3, flat 5, 7. Next is the delta diminished. 1, flat 3, flat 5, 7. Next is the delta augmented. 1, 3, sharp 5, 7. The last is the minor delta augmented. 1, flat 3, sharp 5, 7. These are all the 3 and 4 note chords. They are the most important chords to memorize. From this point on, all your 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths are chord extensions. Whenever somebody tells you to extend a 7th or a major 7th, they're referring to the fact that you can extend it to a 9th, 11th, or 13th. And in your Chords and Voicings volume on pages 218 and 219, you can study the formulas for the 9ths, 11ths, and the 13ths, following the same procedure we just demonstrated. When voicing chords, it is best to visualize every note possible on the entire fretboard for the chord you are working with. Until you have committed this to memory, the chord interval maps are the tools that you will use to accomplish this. Each chord has an interval map, which depicts every note possible for all 12 keys. Let's start with a C major chord, for example. While you may already know several ways to play a C, the concept applies to all chords, including the most complex. You could take a transparency, lay it over the interval map, in this case the major chord interval map on page 16. Then using dry white markers, you can mark off the various combinations of 1, 3, 5, which are the tones of the major chord, and you'll always have a major chord. Just make sure that the tones you are using are within easy grasp, unless you have 16-inch long fingers. When you find the combination that you like or need for the song you are creating, you can then transfer your voicing onto fret pad paper, like so. And you have a permanent record of your chord voicing. There are fret pads with different size fretboards also available. You can even use the interval maps to voice complex chords such as the 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths, even if you don't yet understand the harmony and theory. Let's look at a C 13th. Remember, a C with a 13 after it means it's a dominant 13th. A dominant 7th means the 7 is flatted. The formula for a C 13th would be 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, 13. As we voice our C 13th chord, we can use notes from the C 13th interval map. But if you want a 13th chord, just make sure there is a 13 in the voicing. For instance, we can take a 1, flat 7, 3, 13, and a 9, and we'll deaden the 5th string. And there is a 13th voicing. When you hear a string section, each violin is playing a different note. For instance, violin 1 may be playing the 1 tone, violin 2 might be playing the 3, and violin 3 might be playing the 5. The end result is a chord played by 3 violins. The same concept is used when creating harmony leads for 2 or 3 guitars. Here's a simple line. We will be doing a 3-part harmony for 3 guitars. We will be using the C major interval map on page 16. Guitar 1 will play the tones 5, 1, 3. Guitar 2 will play the tones 1, 3, 5. And Guitar 3 will play the tones 3, 5, 1. Now I will play all the guitar parts simultaneously, since I don't have 2 other guitarists here with me. Using this principle, you can create harmony leads to whatever level of complexity you desire. Movable chords are chord voicings that are merely moved up or down the fretboard for the sake of changing the pitch, while keeping the chord pattern and the fingering the same. In other words, transposing the chord. We'll demonstrate this with a major chord voicing. Let's take an open C chord and turn it into a movable chord. First, we must change the standard fingering, which is 1, 2, 3, to fingers 2, 3, 4. As we slide these 3 fingers up 1 fret, it allows us to use the first finger as a bar, barring the first 3 strings. Our open chord voicing then becomes a movable chord voicing, which we can play all the way up the fretboard, like this. And back down. Now let's look at what we just played. This page is taken right out of page 19 of the Guitar Grimoire Chord Encyclopedia, which is an excellent book for graphing out the motion of movable chords and seeing how the notes move relative to the motion of the chord pattern. Now, let's look back to the Chords and Voicings volume. Following each chord interval map page are 3 example pages. Each example page has 4 keys on it. All the way to the left is a movable chord voicing. There is a different chord voicing for each of the 12 keys. The reason there is a different movable voicing for each key is that by the time you've gotten through all 12 keys, you've learned most of the voicings for that chord on the fretboard. To the right of each chord voicing is a series of compatible scale and mode patterns that can be used to solo over that chord without changing positions. When you change the pitch of your movable chord, remember to raise or lower the compatible scale or mode next to that chord voicing the same amount of frets as the chord voicing. Many of the open chords can be turned into movable chords by refingering them and using the first finger as a bar, as we just did a few moments earlier. Here's an example with an open E chord. Normally fingered with the fingers 1, 2, 3, we'll change it to 2, 3, 4, move everything up a fret, and add the first finger as the bar. And now you can play this chord anywhere up and down the fretboard. Let's do another example with an open A chord. Normally fingered with fingers 1, 2, 3. We'll refinger that 2, 3, 4, move everything up a fret and add the bar. And now it's a movable chord. You can play anywhere on the fretboard. Something else about this particular chord, sometimes these 3 strings, second, third, fourth, are barred with the 3rd finger, and you only play the inside 4 strings like this. Okay? Let's do one more example with the open D. Normally fingered 1, 2, 3. We'll refinger that 2, 3, 4, move everything up a fret and bar the 4th string. Actually, just play the 4th string with your first finger, and now you have a movable chord voicing. And you can do this with countless other chords. Students constantly ask about arpeggios as though arpeggios are some mystical ancient secret. Arpeggios are actually quite simple. The first thing you must remember in dealing with arpeggios is that the arpeggio is nothing more than a chopped up chord. In other words, rather than one strike or strum with the pick or one simultaneous strike on the keyboard, all you do is play the notes in sequence, lowest to highest, or highest to lowest if needed. When we are sweeping an arpeggio, the only thing you have to keep in mind is the distance your fingers have to stretch. The first arpeggio is a basic C major. Here we take the commonly used open C chord voicing. Okay, when we get to the E, we're going to add the G and end on the high C. And here's what's happening. 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. Okay, and it sounds like this. And it could be used for an ending of a song or whatever. Okay, let's take that same voicing and do it as a movable, and it's the same thing. 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. Okay, now we're going to go back to the open A minor, and if we just go like this, We really don't. We've arpeggiated that chord, but it's not really an arpeggio, and I'll tell you why. Because we're going 1, 5, 1, flat 3, 5. Okay. But if we take this and then add the flat 3 and end on the 1. So we got 1, flat 3, 5, 1, flat 3, 5, 1. That's 2 octaves of the triad. Okay? And we can also do the A minor here. Take the A minor bar, but instead of playing it with the 3rd and 4th finger here, we play it with the 2nd and 3rd, and that allows us to do the flat 3 trick again. Okay? And what's happening here is 3 octaves of the triad. 1, flat 3, 5, 1, flat 3, 5, 1, flat 3, 5, 1. And it goes like this. And you can even do things like this. In a nutshell, that's arpeggios. You can use the interval maps and create your own arpeggios. For many beginning guitarists, the concept of inversions seems a little confusing. Unlike keyboardists who quickly and easily grasp the idea of inversions and who in fact learn of inversions very early in the training of their instrument, guitarists will find it a little more difficult due to the fact that the guitar is laid out much different than the keyboard. Inversions, however, are very easy to understand when you see them first demonstrated on the keyboard. Taking a C major chord, we take the lower note and bounce it up an octave, creating the first inversion. Whereas our original formula was 1, 3, 5, now it's 3, 5, 1. If we bounce the 3 up an octave, we now have the second inversion, 5, 1, 3. We'll demonstrate this again using the major 7th chord. 1, 3, 5, 7. We'll bounce up the lower note an octave, and we get 3, 5, 7, 1. That's the first inversion. We'll bounce up the lower note an octave, and we now get 5, 7, 1, 3. That's the second inversion. We'll bounce the lower note up an octave, and this is the third inversion, and we get 7, 1, 3, 5. If we bounce this note up, then we're back to our original chord, 1, 3, 5, 7. Now let's look at inversions on the guitar. We'll start with a simple C major open chord voicing. We'll play the triad, 1, 3, 5. Bounce the 1 up an octave from here to here, and now we have 3, 5, 1. And then we'll bounce the 3 up an octave, and we have 5, 1, 3. complex chords, such as your ninths, 11ths, and 13ths, which are sometimes called polychords, though they seem difficult, are actually quite easy to understand. The first thing you must know is that a ninth is really a second, an 11th is actually a fourth, and a 13th is merely a sixth in the second octave. Using two octaves, here is our 1, 3, 5, 7, our C major 7th chord. Now, moving into the second octave, skipping every other tone, we get the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th. If we would lower the 9th, 11th, and 13th into the first octave, we'd get a mess, which would sound like this. That's why they're extended into the second octave. Looking at an interval map of an F major scale and an F major 13th chord side by side, we see that all the possible tones of the F major 13th chord are the same as the tones of the F major scale. The only difference is that all the 2s from the F major scale are 9s in the F major 13th chord, all the 4s are 11s, and all the 6s are 13s. On the guitar, when we want to play 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths, rarely do we or can we play all the tones possible. We merely voice the chord. Just remember, however, if it is a 13th that you want to play, you must have the 13th, which is really a 6th, in there, otherwise you do not have a 13th voicing. There is another way of understanding complex chords. For beginners, this may be a little difficult to understand. And until you do understand the concept we are about to explain, just use the interval maps. This concept is known as slash chords. It is the most recent variation on the polychord formula. In order to understand slash chords, we must first learn the polychord method. Our first basic polychord formula will be the breaking down of the major 7th chord. Here are the tones 1, 3, 5, 7. Playing the root with the left hand and playing the 3, 5, 7 with the right, we can see that we have a minor over the root at the third. Let's look at what we're seeing here. Think of the polychord formula as x equals y over z. X is the desired chord, y is the 3 or 4 note chord over the root at z, z being the interval. Let's look at this again. A minor over the root at the 3. The polychord for this would be major 7th equals minor over the 3rd. The way this appears as slash chord formula is E minor slash C. Let's extend the major 7th to a major 9th and look at two more ways of polychording this formula. One would be minor 7th over the root at the 3. So our polychord formula would be a major 9th equals minor 7th over the 3. Our slash chord for this would be E minor 7th slash C. As we mentioned earlier, when playing the complex chords such as 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths, we don't necessarily have to play every tone within that chord. Let's demonstrate this with the major 9th again. Here are the tones of a major 9th, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. If we skip the 3, we get a major 9th equals a major over the root at the 5th. The slash chord equivalent is G slash C. So a G slash C is a C major 9th. Let's do one more example with a major 11th chord. We have the tones 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. We could break that chord down as major 11th equals minor flat 9 over the root at the 3. If we skip the 3rd tone, we have major 11th equals dominant over the root at the 5th. And if we skip the 5th tone, we have major 11th equals diminished over the root at the major 7th. There are three common rules usually used in creating substitutions. The first rule is if your chord is a seventh, drop down a fourth and build a minor seventh on that tone. For example, for a C seventh, you could play a G minor seventh. Here's a fourth down. Here's our dominant. Fourth down, and build a minor seventh chord. So what you're getting is a C dominant 11th, and it looks like this because the G is the 5 tone of the C seventh, the B flat is the flat 7 of the C seventh, in other words the dominant, the D is the 9th, and the F is the 11th, hence a C dominant 11th. The second rule, take the melody note and ask yourself what other chords will this note fit in and play those other chords. Some will sound good, some will not. Let your ear be the judge. The third rule is chromatic slide-ins. For example, if your ending chord is a C, you would slide in from a B chord to a C or slide down from a C sharp to a C. Personally, I don't consider the last rule a substitution. I consider it an embellishment. But the first rule is kind of cool and will yield some interesting sounds, as will the second rule. I'm going to give you a new method for creating substitutions. This method is a variation of what we were doing with polychords and slash chords. And we will start with the largest chords. The best example to start with is the major 13th, since that will yield the most possible substitutions. On page 131 of your Chords and Voicings volume is a chart illustrating this. However, that same chart is further expanded on page 7 of the Guitar Grimoire Progressions and Improvisation volume. Okay, let's look at the C major 13th chord substitution breakdown from the Progressions volume, since it's more complete. We have the tones 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, which make up the 13th, the major 13th chord. In C, those are the notes C, E, G, B, D, F, A. The first one you see is an E minor 7th. The next one is an E minor. The next is a G 7th. The next is a G major. The next is a B half diminished. The next is a B diminished. The next is a D minor 7th. Next is a D minor. The next is the F major 7th. Next is an F major. The next is an A minor 7th, and the last is an A minor. All of these chords will work as substitutions in place of the C major 13th because they all have tones from the C major 13th. Some of them do not contain the 13th, so technically you're not playing a 13th, but that's the whole point. You're playing substitutions. This concludes the Chords and Voicings DVD in the Harmony and Theory series. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the Guitar Grimoire Progressions and Improvisation DVD. And remember, freedom of speech is a right, but it can also be abused. Use it wisely.